Bonsoir, bienvenue au Créative, festival artistique et féministe basé à Genève. Ce soir, journée internationale pour l'élimination des violences faites aux femmes, on se retrouve pour une conversation entre Roxane Gay et Rokhaya Diallo, organisée en partenariat avec la Semaine des droits humains de l'Université de Genève. La conversation sera interprétée en français. Si vous voulez la suivre en anglais, rendez-vous sur YouTube. Et je passe la parole à Fanon.
Merci Laïla, pardon. Je suis très heureuse d'être là ce soir au nom de la Semaine des droits humains qui est organisée par l'Université de Genève et ses partenaires. Donc c'est un événement qui existe depuis 2013. Il a été lancé par Madame Micheline Calmiré et on en est donc à la 8e édition spéciale comme pour vous aussi. Puisque toute la semaine se déroule en ligne. Elle a démarré lundi, elle se terminera vendredi. Et on s'associe donc aux créatifs depuis, c'est la deuxième année. Et pour les deux discussions qui ont lieu ce soir, celle qui a eu lieu tout à l'heure avec Judith Butler et Lorraine Bastide, que vous pouvez revoir en différé évidemment. Et ce soir, là maintenant, avec Rokhaya Diallo et Roxane Gay. Je vous souhaite une bonne soirée.
Merci. Bonsoir, good evening everyone. Thank you for being connected wherever you are with us tonight. Thank you to les créatives and to la Semaine des droits humains de l'Université de Genève for making that transatlantic conversation possible. Hi Roxane.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. First of all, before introducing you, I would like to ask you, how are you? Because we're going through a very, very special moment, and I would like to know, wherever you are, how are you?
I am in New York City right now, and I'm okay. You know, some things are good, and some things are not. It's a challenging time, especially in the United States, because we don't have any national leadership with regards to COVID-19. So that's challenging, and it has changed a lot of people's plans, including mine, for the Thanksgiving holiday, which is tomorrow. But other than that, work is going well, life is going well, so I can't complain.
Thank you. So you are a professor, a novelist, a screenwriter, and a playwright. You are the most famous bad feminist who wrote extensively on difficult women. So my first question is, do you enjoy being a disruptive woman?
I enjoy that the older I get, the more I allow myself the freedom to be difficult and complicated. I think that I have spent a lot of my life being very self-conscious and always trying to conform to what other people expected of me. And I have been very not difficult, have been very easy. And that doesn't serve anyone well. So yes, I am very good with it.
And when you say you're difficult to the other or to yourself?
I think mostly when I say difficult, it just means that I have opinions and I believe in standing up for myself and I believe in advocating for the people that I think most need it. And some people consider that difficult because I won't just shut up and look pretty. And that's okay.
You're just a human being.
I am. I mean, it's not complicated.
So I rewatched your TED Talk. And in the video, you tackled the way feminists were always under scrutiny. And you said, we demand perfection for feminists. We go far beyond reasonable constructive criticism to dissecting any woman's feminism. Mm-hmm. Do you feel like being, a feminist today, you're under that kind of scrutiny?
I think any woman or any person who advocates for other women is under quite a lot of scrutiny. And yes, I do, as a feminist, as a Black woman, as a fat woman, I feel like I face quite a lot of scrutiny in terms of how I live, how I move through the world, what I say and what I think.
And does it affect your work and the way you present yourself to the, to the public sphere?
It certainly makes me very aware that I am being watched, or that I feel like I'm being watched and judged. And so sometimes it makes me try to make myself smaller, but metaphorically. But the older I get, the more I try to recognize that the scrutiny is there, but I don't have to change who I am or how I am because of that scrutiny.
And you were also speaking about how visible and popular feminists were made saints, put on a pedestal, and whenever they fail, they are knocked off the pedestal. So, like, how do you think that it's something that is very linked to nowadays, or has it always been the case?
It's always been the case that the more visible you become as a feminist, the more that people want to judge you, the more that people want to hold you to an unreasonable standard. And when you don't meet that standard, they knock you off the pedestal and say that you should have never been up there in the first place, even though they're the ones who put you there.
Regarding feminists, you're very interested into intersectionality. You said, I reject the mainstream feminism that has historically ignored or deflected the needs of women of color, working class women, queer women, or transgender women in favor of supporting white middle and upper class white women. So how did you get conscious of the fact that what we label feminism was actually the defense of the rights of the most privileged women?
A lot of it comes from reading and learning about feminism and the history of feminism and the suffrage movement and other women's movements across time, and especially looking at the 1960s and 70s, when you would have thought that feminism would have tried to appeal to a broad coalition and instead told lesbians, wait until we get to you. Let's really advocate for women as a whole before we start to worry about Black women or lesbian women or really any other woman who is not a white heterosexual middle-class woman. And that's incredibly frustrating. And it's incredibly frustrating to also see that mainstream feminism seems to repeat the same mistakes over and over again. And we have these conversations now, and we had these conversations in 1965, and we had these conversations in 1920, and you have to wonder what it will take for mainstream feminism to recognize that we have to rise together or we won't rise at all.
Like, did you have any expectation from the mainstream feminism, and did you have any disappointment? Like, did you experience something that made you realize that we were going through the same, questions as what was happening in the 60s?
I haven't had any direct experiences where I've felt like, okay, the needs of my community are being overlooked. But, there are a lot of microaggressions that you encounter in feminist conversations that may not be as blatant as they used to be, but are still there and are still reminders of how a lot of people have not yet gotten on board with intersectionality and really considering that we have to recognize that we might all be women together, but not all women are the same.
The day after the election of Joe Biden, you tweeted, I quote you, "More white women voted for Trump this time around." What do you understand in the fact that so many white women support such a misogynistic president?
I think that women, and white women in particular, are not willing to compromise their relationship to power. And they don't want to upset the people who hold most of it. And so they try not to rock the boat by voting for someone other than Trump. And it's incredibly frustrating. It's to see that, exit polls are not perfect, but to see that at least broadly, more white women voted for Trump this time around, it shows that we haven't learned anything from 2016 and that we have not made any progress. And there have been a lot of people from all walks of life who have been doing a lot of work over the past 4 years to try and move the needle. And I think some communities have been reached and have started to change, but for whatever reason, white women are comfortable with being complicit with racism.
But it's very surprising, especially because from Europe, from France, we've seen the Women's March. We've seen so many visible and famous white women calling out the president, saying that it was the time or never to get together. And there were crowds of women, and among them white women. So how do you explain that even having that momentum, it didn't really prevent most of the the majority of the white women from voting for Donald Trump?
I think a lot of people do one thing publicly and another thing privately. And I think that it was publicly popular to march and to wear a pussy hat and to participate in the Me Too movement, for example. And we don't know how women actually voted or chose to not vote and abstained. And that's a problem. It is a problem. And it actually makes all of the marching and the speeches feel even more disingenuous, because if you weren't going out after those events to talk to your friends about how they were going to vote and to advocate for candidates who aren't racist and xenophobic, then what were you doing with your free time?
And at the same time, you tweeted, like on the same thread, that 91% of Black women voted for Biden. So do you think that there is an uncrossable line between white women and women of color? Because it sounds like there is a whole different way of prioritizing what's important in American politics.
It's a great question. I'm not ready to give up and say that that line is unbreachable. Because otherwise, that would just be so fatalistic and so depressing.
Yes.
But, I do think that we have a huge problem. And I do think it's a problem that white women need to resolve on their own. There's nothing women of color can do to make white women see our humanity. And so they need to sit down with themselves and have these difficult conversations about who they're voting for and what they support and what they're willing to compromise and who they're willing to compromise for power or to be adjacent to power. Black women, time and again, show that our politics are in the right place. We are the only demographic that turned out in such numbers. Not the only demographic, let me take that back. I think women of color in general really showed up and did the right thing. Black women led the way, Latina women were there, Native American women, Asian women, South Asian women. So a lot of women of color decided that enough was enough. And I hope that white women and of course women of color who voted for Trump come to understand why they were perhaps voting against their own interests. And regarding the politics in the US, I read the piece that you published in June in the New York Times. It was after the death of George Floyd, and your piece was entitled "How We Save Ourselves." You wrote in that piece, "Each time there is a horrifying racist incident, I wonder whether things will actually be different." And in that piece, you seem very hopeful to see a change in the way we address systemic racism. Are you still as hopeful as you were in June? And if yes, what do you hope, and how do you hope it will change? I don't think I was hopeful in June. I think I was angry, and I remain angry. And I also was trying and am trying to look ahead and to believe change is possible. Because if we decide that everything is hopeless, we're leaving behind the most vulnerable people. I'm probably going to be fine. Most people are going to be fine. But people who are targets of this current administration aren't going to be fine. And we can't leave them behind, and we can't leave ourselves behind. I think we can do better. And now that Joe Biden is the president-elect, I think that's encouraging. I think it's a step in the right direction. He is certainly a centrist. But we are in a position where we have to move away from the center, and that's more, and toward the left, of course, and that's more possible under a Joe Biden than a Donald Trump. And so I'm definitely energized and ready to work.
And how do you explain that it took a George Floyd to die for like outrage to gain such a large part of the population in the U.S.? What was different that time? Because there have been already Eric Garner who died in front of of a camera in the very same way. So what did change in 2020?
I think what happened with George Floyd is that the video was 8 minutes and 42 seconds long. And it was so blatant. It's always been blatant, of course, and Black people know that. But I think for once, white people recognize that, oh my goodness, this man sat there with his knee on George Floyd's neck for 8 minutes and 42 seconds and stared at the camera and knew what he was doing and knew there would be no consequence. And to see it that blatant, I think white people prefer their police brutality to happen away and out of sight and in more abbreviated moments. And they resent when they have to confront just how pervasive and how brutal it is. And they could not ignore this one. So I think it's a terrible sacrifice that George Floyd was, but it at least woke people up.
And you think that with the presidency of Biden, it will change the politics on systemic racism? I've seen the president-elect and the vice president-elect addressing very explicitly systemic racism, which is very powerful to me as a European, because you would never hear any European leader addressing racism so explicitly. So do you think that beyond the words, there will be a change in politics? Because at the time when Barack Obama was the president, there was already Black Lives Matter, and there was already a task force at the White House. So do you think that work will be continued, and in what way it is possible to change, to dismantle a system that is so deeply rooted into your history?
That's a good question, and I do not know. But I do think change is possible. I do think that Biden knows the right things to say and will follow through, but I do not know the extent to which he's going to follow through. I do not know how radical he's going to be, because thus far he has indicated that he will not be at all radical. He refuses to even entertain the possibility of defunding the police. And so how much change is possible when you can't root out the primary evil? So I'm not optimistic in that regard, but I do think he at least acknowledges it, and it's rare that we have a leader who acknowledges that this racism is going on and that it's systemic and that it has to change. And so I think it's a step in the right direction, and I hope that progressives continue to hold him accountable and push him further left.
And at the same time, Trump gained more votes in numbers than it had in 2016. So it means that you have people who were not discouraged for voting for him this year, even despite what happened during the 4 last years. So will it be possible to change things with a population in which so many people are ready to elect a leader that is, blatantly racist and sexist and, homophobic?
I don't know. I don't know. I'm
sorry. I'm interviewing you as if you are the president, but you're the closest person I know who, to the American politics. So you're. I'm trying to get answers from you, but I know you don't have magical recipes, or.
I don't. I think that when you see how many people voted for Trump this year, it's so disheartening. The day after the election, my wife was inconsolable because she could not believe that 67 million people at the time, because we're still counting votes, she could not believe that 67 million people had voted for him. She genuinely thought that it would be far fewer people, and I wasn't surprised. I was not surprised because I think what Trump did is open a door that racists could walk through without feeling ashamed. And he allowed them to stop hiding in the dark. And they love it. When you go to his rallies, you can see that they love it. They love being free to say whatever they want and think whatever they want and not have to abide by any cultural norms. And it's really quite anarchic. And it does not speak well to humanity that this many people are this comfortable expressing this much bigotry. It's, yeah. I think there's a lot of hatred in this world.
Yeah, we see that in many countries, not only in the US, but also in Brazil, in Hungary, even in France, which is my country. So after the death of George Floyd, the outrage went global. In France, we had major protests, and local activists used the momentum to force our country to face its own racism instead of commenting what was happening in the US as if it was something very exotic. Because, you know, in France, the newspaper, the journalists are used to cover very clearly what happens in the US and speaking about, you know, whiteness and blackness and things like that. But whenever it happens in France, and I think it's the same for other countries in Europe, it suddenly doesn't have anything to do with racism. So yeah, it's like, because we're not that kind of people. Yeah, racism is good for
it happens in France, Canada. I will say Italy to a lesser extent because I think they're just more openly racist there. But absolutely, like, these are American problems. We don't have these problems. When I think that, these are, you know, racism is everywhere.
Yes, it is, especially because American was founded by Europeans, so we got it
from somewhere.
Yes, those ideas were exported from our continent, so we have much to do with what's happening in the US. So were you surprised by the response, after the killing of George Floyd, and were you surprised that it went so, you know, global, and that it translated locally into so many forms, into so many protests that echoed local death of people of color?
Mm-hmm. I was surprised by the international response to George Floyd's murder, but I was really encouraged. I was actually probably more encouraged by the international response because it showed that the world was finally paying attention and perhaps taking a look at the racism happening in their own countries and the Islamophobia and the xenophobia, because Europe is just as guilty of the xenophobia and closing its borders to refugees as the United States. They're just more polite about it. And so I was really happy to see that. And, you know, time will tell what becomes of this moment.
So I'm shifting to a different topic. We're today on November 25, which is the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. What does this date mean to you?
You know, and this day it's great that we're talking about violence against women throughout the world, because it is a problem in every single country. It's frustrating that we need to have this day, that violence against women is so commonplace that we need an entire day dedicated to creating awareness around the subject. So it's a double-edged sword.
In your memoir, Hunger, you shared your story and the story of your body. You said in an interview that you built your body into a fortress, and you told about the journey it was to, you know, build that fortress after a very brutal and very violent experience. Would you be okay to share with us what started your very negative relationship to your body, and how it echoes the day that we are in today?
Sure. When I was 12 years old, I was gang raped by a group of young men, and I was a very naive 12 years old, and it was 34 years ago. So 12 meant something slightly different than it does now, even though 12 is still a child. And so I was very stunned by it. I was very traumatized, and I didn't tell anyone. And so my coping mechanism was to turn to food, partly for comfort and partly because I thought if I made myself bigger, I could protect myself and this terrible thing would not happen again. And, you know, that's what you would expect a child to do in response to something terrible. It did not serve me well, but it felt like it was the only thing I had available, like the only choice. And so for many years, that was the only choice I made. And it didn't protect me at all. But, you know, I think when something scars you in that way, you are willing to do anything to not have to experience it again. And that's certainly what the story of my body was for many years.
And how that relationship to your body affected your mind and your relationship to the others?
Well, you know, the bigger your body becomes, the more isolated you tend to become from the rest of the world because your world becomes smaller and smaller. And, you know, if you haven't yet found a way to believe in body positivity and fat positivity, you can experience quite a lot of shame and a lot of self-hatred. And, you know, like most fat people, I certainly struggled with my body and feeling shame about my body and things like that. And it has been a journey and a long amount of time, a lot of time in therapy to develop a healthier relationship with my body and to stop thinking that my self-worth is connected to my size.
And you say that, like regarding the relationship that you have with other people, that you say that when you are a fat person, especially when you are a fat woman, people assume things about you. And what kind of things? How do you explain that people feel so entitled that they think that they know things about you, even if they don't know you?
Well, when people see a fat body, they make all kinds of assumptions. They think they know why you're fat. They think that you just sit around eating, you know, junk food all day and that you never exercise and that you don't care about yourself. And even if that were the case, so what? Like, if you smoke, are you going to judge someone for eating things you don't approve of? Like, everyone has a vice. And I think it's really important to try and get to a place where we don't judge what we do with our bodies. But it can be really hard to develop that kind of acceptance. And it can be really hard to withstand the judgments of others that you're lazy, that you are unlovable, that you're unfuckable. And none of these things are true. They're all grounded in people's own fears about fatness and their own assumptions about fatness. And I think it's really important for visible fat people to push back against those narratives as often as possible.
And how do you do that as a visible fat person?
Well, I think you try to live without shame and without apology, and you don't make yourself the butt of the joke, which so many fat people do in the public eye. You don't have to explain yourself. You hold your head high, and you try to live as joyfully as you can. And some days are easy and some days are not.
Like for everyone.
Yes, absolutely. It's not special.
We're going through the same up and downs.
Yes.
You just mentioned body positivity, and there seems to be a trend on body positivity that started some years ago. Do you think it's something that is good, and isn't it something that promotes certain types of bodies rather than other? I have the feeling that that body positivity is also very focused on certain kinds of body and isn't really open to the very diversity of the human bodies. How do you feel about that trend of body positivity?
Yes, I think body positivity is great. I think anything that encourages people to feel comfortable and strong and healthy and safe in their bodies is a good idea. I also think that the popular body positivity movement has in general been co-opted by people who have every reason to be positive about their bodies. People who are regular sized are straight sized and who are traditionally physically fit. Like, oh yeah, I'm sorry, but if you're a supermodel, you should be body positive. Like, my goodness, what's not to be positive about? And so that's why I think it's important to get a little more radical and to talk about fat positivity, where you frame fatness in a positive light. And, you know, I can't always get on board with that, but I always try. And I always try to center fat positivity and truly fat people, and not people who are like, I'm 10 pounds overweight, which, like, come on, get over it. And so it's important. But yeah, every movement gets co-opted by people, and you just have to push back.
And aren't you concerned, or I don't know, about the fact of maybe being a symbol, or, you know, maybe being the voice of a group of people that you don't know, or?
Well, I don't think of myself as a voice of fat people, because there are so many people out there who are actually doing the work of fat activism. I just happen to be a visible writer who is fat. But you can't control how people choose to frame you and position you. You can only control what you do. And so that's all I focus on.
You're also very involved in the promotion of pop culture. You are the first Black woman to lead a Marvel comic. It happened in 2016 when Ta-Nehisi Coates contacted you. It's an incredible experience. How was it?
I loved writing for Marvel. I loved the opportunity that Ta-Nehisi gave me to write World of Wakanda. It was outstanding to be able to immerse myself in a world I did not actually know quite a lot about before I started to do the project, and to write a comic book about Black lesbians who don't die at the end of the of the story, which is so rare. Yes. It was wonderful.
So, what did you learn through that experience? Because it's not something that you did before writing for comics. Was it something that was an interesting experience for you? Other kind of writings?
Oh, absolutely. Storytelling is storytelling. So, whether you're telling a story in a short story or a novel or an essay or a comic book or a film script, you know, you're just telling a story. And writing comics has certainly gotten me to think more visually about my work and to think more about scene. And I feel like I've only grown as a writer since I started writing comics.
And what was the response, especially of among the fans of comics? They can be very demanding regarding you know, the stories that are told in the comics. So did you meet some of, you know, did you went to some conventions of comics, and how did the people welcome you?
Yes, I went to Comic-Con in, I think, 2016 or 2017, and I loved it, and I had a really great response from comics fans. But you know, my fans are very specific. And so the sort of typical nerdy white guy comic readers that are very resistant to change, none of them really came around to talk to me or to come to my panels, because they're not interested. And that's fine, because I'm not interested in them. And so, yeah, like, whatever. In general, the comic was really well received, and it did very well. And I was very happy with how it sold, with how people responded to the work. It won an Eisner, which you can't complain about winning an Eisner your first time out. That's awesome. And it was a great experience. And I wish that the series had continued.
And do you think that pop culture is a tool to change the way people perceive minorities? Or is it just something that is very superficial?
I don't think pop culture is superficial at all. I think that it can be one of many tools to change public perception about any number of issues, whether it's race, gender, sexuality, ability, or other forms of difference. But it has to be done well, and not all pop culture about difference is done well.
your novel, An Untamed State, was optioned by Fox Searchlight. When will the film be visible? And did you work on the screenplay?
Yes, I wrote the screenplay with I co-wrote it with my director Gina Prince Bythewood, and it was a really great experience. It was my first screenplay. It was challenging. We sold the project, which was great, and then Fox was bought by Disney, and then when they did, they wanted us to completely change the story into something it wasn't, and so they chose not to move forward with the film, and so now we have to figure out sort of where we go from here with the project.
Okay, so yeah, I hope we'll know more very soon.
I do too.
And you also write extensively, and I learned that even Madonna requested you to make her profile. How did that happen?
There is an American artist named Marilyn Minter, who happens to be friends with Madonna, and at some point a few years ago, she was talking with Madonna and mentioned my work. And I think Madonna then went on to read Bad Feminist, and then requested me to write the profile of her for the cover story of Harper's Bazaar.
And like everybody knows Madonna, how do you work on her profile? Like
the way you work on anyone's. At the end of the day, she's just a person. She's a person who's very well known and with good reason. And so it can be intimidating, but I just tried to remember that she's a woman. She's flawed, she's interesting, she's dynamic, and I wanted to be able to convey that as much as possible.
Was she happy about the profile you did on her?
I think so. She tweeted about it, so I think she enjoyed it.
You have a passion for reality TV, I think. How do you deal with the fact of being an intellectual and being so passionate about shows that are considered as bad television?
Well, I don't consider them bad television. I consider them great television.
Okay.
And so, you know, I think a lot of people want to judge, but they also watch trash. You know, everyone has that show that they like to watch that maybe seems mindless or is just a fun distraction. And I think that's great. And I work really hard. I work a lot. And so, yes, I am going to sit down at the end of the day and watch some really ridiculous reality TV. 90 Day Fiance, bring it. I'm just here for it. It's great.
And what are you currently watching, for example? And what is
I'm currently watching 90 Day Fiance and Real Housewives of Salt Lake City.
Okay, and okay, thank you.
And I highly recommend both.
Yeah, I don't think we can access them here, but I try to have a look on them. I watch the French-speaking ones, and I totally agree with you. We also have a point in common. Both of us have parents who come from countries that used to be French colonies. My family is from Senegal, and your parents are from Haiti. As I read about you, they exposed you much to the Haitian culture, and also to its history. Do you feel a connection with the former victims of the French colonial history?
Oh, certainly. Absolutely. I was raised with and continue to have a very strong Haitian identity. And my family's still there. My dad still works there. And, you know, colonialism it's a hell of a thing. And I do think that it unites a lot of people throughout the world. Whether it's Senegal or Haiti or Algeria or any number of other colonies, or former colonies, I should say. I always think that there's going to be a kinship there.
And Haiti has something very particular because it was founded by former enslaved people, and it was also the first Black republic. So how did it fit the way your parents raised you? Because many Haitians are very proud of that specific history, and Haiti paid the hard price for freeing itself from France. It paid like with money, which cost the economy of Haiti, and today it's still the first country that was founded by enslaved people. So how do you cope with that?
I was raised to understand that that my ancestors were free, and that we came from a free Black republic, and that does a lot for your confidence to know that your people were free. We did pay a really significant price for that freedom, and we continue to pay that price. Haiti still has to pay off that debt to France, and no French president who claims to be progressive has yet said, we forgive this debt, which I think is criminal. So it's challenging. It's challenging to see the price that you have to pay for freedom, but it's worth it.
And the fact that you are at the same time a Black woman in the U.S., but also a daughter of immigrant, how does it connect you to does it connect you to the struggles of migration, and especially the politics that have been very hard on them lately?
Yeah, it definitely connects me, because you can never lose sight of how lucky you are to live, a different kind of life. Haiti is a very complicated place. It is a beautiful country. I love it. I'm proud to be from Haiti. But the reality is that it is a country that has been ravaged by environmental calamity. The country is eroding at an alarming rate. It has very little native industry because it's an island, and tourism used to be the primary economic driver. And then when unrest began, and it's cyclical in Haiti, it happens quite a lot, the tourism basically dried up, and there's corruption, there's rampant poverty. It's bittersweet because you are from this kind of place, and yet you have to worry about what will become of your people and how the country will survive each new thing, whether it's an earthquake or a hurricane or a president who is ruling without a parliament, which is currently what's happening in Haiti right now. It's challenging.
It is. Regarding to come back to feminism, I found very interesting the fact that you said that you are not in a position to dictate to women from other cultures what equality should look like, and it's something that really resonates with what we're going through in Europe. For example, in France, the hijab, so the Muslim headscarf, have been debated for 3 decades, and it is banned in schools. The full veil is totally forbidden in the streets. Are you aware of the debate we're having in Europe on identity, and especially on Islam, and how the bodies of Muslim women are under constant scrutiny, and they are seen as like the major focus in politics when it comes to identity?
I am, actually. And, it's challenging. I understand what's going on, especially in France. I will say I'm most aware of it in France, and especially with the new decrees that Macron announced. I understand the intent behind them, but I think that we can debate the merits of those ideas about controlling Islamic identity, which shouldn't actually be a thing that happens, and controlling women's bodies. I think it's one thing to say that you want to discourage any place that might lead to creating a homegrown terrorist, but then also say that we're going to control how Muslim women move through the world, how they choose to adorn themselves, and if they choose to wear the hijab. it's not our place to debate whether it's feminist or anti-feminist or not. I think Muslim women are perfectly capable of speaking up for themselves and advocating for themselves. And I think we have to follow their lead and listen to them when they tell us what they need from us instead of trying to be overly prescriptive. So, it's really frustrating. And a lot of people will point to, what happened with Charlie Hebdo,
yes.
or the poor teacher who was murdered. Yes. And the knife attack recently.
Mm-hmm.
And you look at these things and you think, oh my goodness, the problem is Islam. But the problem is actually not Islam. The problem is terrorism. And sometimes terrorists are Muslim. And I don't understand why governments can't seem to understand that difference. And that there are all kinds of terrorists, some of whom are French, and you can, by the way, be French and Muslim. There's no nuance in any of the discussion, and there's no acknowledgement of the thousands, if not millions, I'm sure it's millions at this point, the millions of French Muslims minding their own business and wanting to live their lives, wanting to worship the way they want to worship, wanting to follow the religious protocols that they want to follow, and being told that they can't simply because of who they are. I don't know that there's any other people that is so singled out for discrimination in that way. It's so unacceptable.
It is, especially when you have white feminists lecturing, Muslim feminists about how they should behave, how they should dress themselves. And the thing that you said, that it's not about Islam, it's about terrorism, is very accurate, especially because Muslims have died in attacks. Like, they are also targeted as citizens, as French people. So it's like there is not on one side the Muslims and on the other side the victims of terrorism. You can be Muslim and a victim, and it's something that really draw my attention, because all the discussions are focused on women, and when you have the same belief as a man, you won't be questioned in the same way. So it's at the end of the day, even if all the terrorists are men, it's finally at the end of the day, it's the women that are questioned and that are forced to remove their hijab, or to not to be out with their hijab. So it's I was very interested in what you had to say, especially being Muslim woman and not wearing the hijab. I know how it's important to have a choice, but at least let the women have a choice. I would like also to speak about the pandemic and the COVID-19 in Europe, as in the US. It overwhelmingly affected communities of color, and you decided to support people in need. And you tweeted that you were willing to offer $100 to anyone in need. Why did you decide that, and what was the outcome of your offer?
Here in the United States, the government has completely abandoned the American people. We have had only one major relief bill that has been passed, and that was a one-time check for $1,200 to people who made, I think, less than $100,000 a year. So there are a lot of people who are experiencing a lot of need, who are experiencing hunger, who are dealing with illness. And so, how do you deal with that when the federal government refuses to do anything? And I think that what a lot of people have decided to do is mutual aid, where in our communities, we're going to simply try and help one another within our means. And so at the beginning of the pandemic, when I saw that no help was coming, I just thought, well, what can I do? Because I had lost all of my income overnight when everything shut down, because I make most of my living from touring and doing events. And I was going to be okay because I have savings and I married well. But
congratulations.
Thanks. I was really, I was still stressed about money, because I have savings and I'm going to be able to get through 2020. But if things don't start to pick up in spring of 2021, I'm in real trouble. And I mean, I'll just get another job. It's fine. But still, I'm stressed. And I thought, if I'm stressed from this position of privilege, then people who are living paycheck to paycheck must be terrified. And so I just wanted to do something small. It was a very small gesture, $100. I was originally going to give it to 10 people, but when I saw the amount of need, I just started to, I don't know, ultimately I think I probably ended up giving to 100 people. And just knowing that people could pay a bill or pay part of a bill or get groceries, keep their electricity running, whatever. It's none of my, I didn't even ask what they're doing with the money because it's not my business. If you want to take that and go buy some tequila, enjoy. It just felt good to help. And I was inspired by another writer named Shea Serrano, who originally started the idea. And I realized that I could do this. And so I did.
I have some questions from the audience that I would like to share with you. One of them is, do you see similar mechanism between fat phobia and racism?
Absolutely. I think that anytime bigotry is involved, there are similar mechanisms of isolating people that stray from the ideal or who we decide is the ideal. And some prejudices are more acceptable than others. People at least acknowledge that racism is bad. But with fat phobia, people love to frame it in terms of health, that you're unhealthy as if it's anyone's business. So what if I'm unhealthy? First of all, I'm not. But even if I were, it's not of your business because you don't live in this body. It's fine. You're going to be okay. And so that's where it starts to get a little different. You know, the mechanisms are the same, but the ways in which those mechanisms play out can be different. And there are some prejudices that are more acceptable than others. I won't say that fat phobia is like the last acceptable prejudice, because I think that there are all kinds of acceptable prejudices in our world. Disability, I think people are incredibly discriminatory towards people with disabilities. I think transphobia is allowed to flourish. I think homophobia is still alive and well. And so, you know, it's challenging to articulate, but yes, there are some similarities.
There is another question about social media. So what is the influence of social media in feminist struggles?
Mm-hmm. Social media can be a really great platform for spreading the message and for generating enthusiasm and collective action. So, you know, those are the things I think social media does well. And it's also a place for testimony. When, especially with Me Too, we saw so many women using the hashtag, and even men and people, non-binary people from across the gender spectrum were using the hashtag to talk about their experiences with sexual predation or sexual violence. And so it created increased awareness so that people could truly see the extent of the problem. And we saw that with You OK Sis, and so many of the other hashtag movements we've seen over, I would say, the past 5 or 6 years. We see it with being able to talk about lives lost. So this past year, Breonna Taylor lost her life. She was in bed asleep when she was murdered by police in Louisville, Kentucky, and her murderers are still free. And only one of them has been charged for a crime that was not related to her death. And so, again, that was a great place for feminists to bring attention, because when Black women die, we don't get as much public attention as when Black men die at the hands of police. And it's pathetic that we even have to say that we have to say that out loud, that that's a thing, that even in death, we cannot achieve equality. But here we are.
And you are very active on Twitter. And we know that women are easy targets on social media. A research conducted by Amnesty International about abuse against women politicians and journalists on Twitter found that Black women were disproportionately targeted, being 84% more likely than white women to be mentioned in abusive or problematic tweets. As a Black journalist myself, it is something I constantly experience. Do you feel that you are overexposed to online assaults, and how do you deal with that?
Yes, I think I think all women of color, but especially Black women, are very vulnerable to online assault. And it's incredibly, it takes its toll. It takes its toll. I used to have more tolerance for it. I used to handle it better. But, you know, they wear you down after a while with the hatred and the breathtaking cruelty. Every time I think I've seen it all in terms of the cruelties that people can foist on you, something new happens. And I think, oh my goodness, wow, you had that in you. So it's really challenging. I do try to spend less time on social media now, which helps. I try to engage less. I used to engage a lot more and sort of just make fun of them because they're idiots, but nothing as good as coming of it. It's just cathartic, and you know that even that's no longer working. And so I'm trying to engage less, and I mute a lot of conversations. Like, I don't care what you think about my tweet. I just don't. And so I mute them, and haters just yell into the void.
What do you enjoy in the fact of being so active on social media?
I started on social media when I was living in a rural place during grad school, and I wanted to feel connected to the writing community. And so it was like being at a cocktail party, but in my pajamas. And that's the part I still enjoy, being able to talk to other writers, being able to talk to readers, being able to talk to interesting people, and feel like, oh, we're all engaging in this social activity, but I don't have to leave the safety of my home or the peace and quiet of my home. And so I enjoy that energy, and I also get a lot of news from Twitter.
I have heard you saying several times that you were fighting with the imposter syndrome. How do you deal with it when it comes to write or to speak publicly about your work?
I just try to always remind myself that I belong in whatever room I happen to be in, or whatever conversation I happen to be a part of, or whatever publication I'm contributing to. And it requires just a lot of active energy in terms of affirming my right to be in every given space. And you know, not every day I believe it. And I find the ability to be able to work despite not believing. You know, I have the I have imposter syndrome, but I do what I need to do anyway. I do my work regardless.
What does success mean to you?
You know, it can mean a lot of different things. Certainly financial success is a marker of success for me. Being able to pay my bills and to pay my student loans. I'm sorry, my cat is going crazy and I don't know why. Being able to pay my bills and, you know, take care of my family and things like that feels like a marker of success. But being able to contribute to the literary community, being able to mentor, being able to create publications where I support where I pay writers like fair and living wages, that feels like success more than anything. And seeing what the people I mentor go out into the world and do, seeing my students publishing novels and essay collections, getting agents and just thriving, like that is like, man, look, I contributed to that in some small way. Like, that it's just a great feeling.
I have another question from the audience. Has your relationship to your body changed since the publishing of Hunger? Did it affect the way you see yourself?
Yeah, it did. After I wrote Hunger and during the process of writing Hunger, it really forced me to take a look at some of my behaviors and practices and the ways in which I saw myself, the way I treated my body. I ended up getting weight loss surgery. And 2.5 years ago now. And it was a difficult decision, but I felt like I wasn't getting any younger and I was healthy, but I worried that my luck would run out and my joints would start to fail, and I did not want to have to deal with that. And so even though I'm not, you know, even though it frustrates me, you know, the smaller I get, the easier it is to feel better about myself. And, you know, it's hard not to internalize fat phobia, and I'm as I'm as susceptible to it as anyone else. But I'll also say the smaller I get, the more fiercely I advocate for fat positivity.
And so what do you do to feel good, to enjoy yourself, and to relax?
Reality TV helps. I love to read still. I love cooking. Sometimes writing. I used to always get pleasure from writing, but now I don't have as much time to write. And so it becomes a little more stressful. But cooking is really my go-to relaxation. I love to cook for my wife and our friends, and I love baking, and just the meditative aspects of it, of following the recipe, can be really, really great.
We hear more and more among activists the fact that self-care is very important, and it's also a tool of activism. How do you feel with that? That the fact that people give so much importance now about self-care.
Sorry about that. Self-care is one of those things that's challenging and overused, but I firmly believe that activists need self-care more than anyone else, because if you don't take care of yourself, you are not going to be able to be in the fight for the long run. And so whenever I see young activists who seem to practically be burning themselves out, I desperately want to tell them, please realize you're not going to necessarily save the world in one day, and you can't do it alone. And so learn to share that burden and learn to take care of yourself, and recognize that you need to rest and relax and enjoy your life as much as anyone else, if not more.
And is it an advice that you use for yourself?
I try, but I do not always follow that advice.
What would you like to, because we're going to the end of the hour, would you like maybe to share with us your self-care routine, and to give some advices of, about how you can just take care of yourself, and especially during the times we're going through?
I don't have one per se, but I'm working on that. I'm developing one. One of the key things is to unplug from the internet and not scroll through all the terrible news. I don't follow Donald Trump, and I never have. And so I stay far away from whatever nonsense he's doing, which is really helpful. And I try to make time for having a personal life. I like to spend actual time with my partner. We have date nights, even with COVID, even if it's in the house and we watch a play online or something like that. And so just nurturing myself and my relationships with friends, with family, with partner, is a really great form of self-care for me. And also, this is terrible and capitalistic, but I'm not immune to online shopping and just buying nonsense. So a little bit of that.
We have a good excuse for that now with the lockdown and all the COVID situation.
We really do. It's this is it. This is all we're going to be able to do for a very long time. So let's just enjoy it.
And could you share with us the next, maybe, about your the next topic you will cover with your work? What are you interested in now, and what will we be able to read from your publication, in the future?
Yes, I am writing a book of writing advice and a YA novel. And I am also adapting Hunger into a movie for a television network.
Excellent.
And I'm working on a comic. I'm working on a TV show. I'm adapting someone else's memoir into a TV series. So I have a lot going on.
Yes. When do you have time to watch reality TV?
I watch TV while I write, actually.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Thank you. Thank you. Merci beaucoup, Roxane Gay.
Oh, merci.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much for being with us. It was a great pleasure, and I really feel privileged to have had the opportunity to share that conversation with you. Merci beaucoup. Thank you. It was a pleasure. I wish you the best, even if, and I can't wait to read and to see and to watch what you will create in the next future. So thank you for your time. Merci
I
beaucoup.
appreciate it.
Thank you to the audience for watching us. Merci beaucoup, merci aux créatives, merci au public. C'était un grand plaisir de partager ce moment avec Roxane Gay. J'ai vraiment pris beaucoup de plaisir, après l'avoir beaucoup lu et entendu dans des vidéos sur Internet, de pouvoir échanger directement avec elle. Donc c'était un plaisir. Merci aux créatives et merci à tous et à toutes.